This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
Good evening. This is the City Council Ordinance Committee meeting for April 14th, 2025. We are here this evening to talk about the short-term rental ordinance. All three of the counselors are present. But right now, before we do any meeting business, we will open it up for public speak. So if anyone would like to speak about this particular topic or any other topic, now is the time for you to be able to do that. Does anyone have anything that they want to say?
Yeah. I would like for you guys to consider, when you get into your talking about everything, the 200-day limit that's proposed right now on a non-owner occupied dwelling. I would love to see that go up in number.
Any other? Yeah.
I just had a question.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to ask you too. Can you provide your name and your address?
132 West Street, Easthampton.
John Lucido, 63 Strong Street. Just had a question about this would be 4-50.4 C. An owner whose principal residence is located in the city of Easthampton may register to use one dwelling unit as a short-term rental on the same parcel as said residence. Additionally, or alternatively, an owner may register to operate one dwelling unit as a short-term rental on a separate parcel in Easthampton. So when I read this, it sounded like a long-winded way to specifically allow people to have two short-term rentals. But only this one very specific person. So I just have ADU short-term rental on my property, and I would like to rent my 2 spare bedrooms in my basement. So with the way that that's worded, it's so specific that I guess I can't do it. So I guess that needs to be more general, or you need to write it for every specific kind of way that someone would want to have 2 short-term rentals.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you tell me, I know you said the 4-50, can you just give me the very specific?
Yeah, 4-50.4 C.
Thank you.
Basically saying you could have 2 on 2 separate properties, but it's not saying that you could have 2 on 1 property.
I think I saw your hand. Yeah.
Laurel Gardner, 13 Plain Street. I'm pleased that the Ordinance Committee is creating a law that addresses short-term rentals in Easthampton. I also think it's great that there is a moratorium on enforcement until the ordinance is in place. In part, I have personal reasons. It's not easy being married to a man whose job sometimes includes telling people things they don't want to hear. However, I also think that the moratorium is an excellent way for the mayor and the city councilors to acknowledge the fact that it probably would have made sense to adopt short-term rental regulations concurrent with accepting the state's room tax. I know this caused a lot of confusion. This draft, though, goes even further than a moratorium to smooth that situation by allowing a provisional 1-year extension to any code-compliant hosts excluded by the final ordinance. All well and good. However, I do caution counselors that I think the current draft is biased toward property owners interested in running or continuing to run short-term rentals. And I get it. You are mainly hearing from constituents who are suddenly uncertain about one of their sources of income. And yet, your duty is to think about the overall impacts of each law you pass. Arguably, each time a bedroom, apartment, house, or accessory dwelling unit is used for short-term rather than long-term rental, housing stock diminishes for people who want to live here but are not homeowners. Watching this draft evolve, I am not so naive to think you'll amend it greatly. However, I'd just like to make a few suggestions that might add balance. First, I like your idea of a cap, although 50 seems generous to me. Again, those are 50 units potentially housing a resident rather than a tourist. And so I hope you'll eliminate the proposed annual cap increase. Secondly, I've already introduced this idea to City Council, but I will repeat it here. Please prohibit accessory dwelling units from being used as short-term rentals. Other cities and towns, even some that don't allow short-term rentals at all, have done this. As recently as 2021, our own Councilor Peak gave a presentation encouraging ADUs as one small but earnest effort to increase long-term rental housing and/or allow aging residents to keep their homes, not for the promotion of tourism. In fact, the noted downside to this new source of rentals was the fact that homes with ADUs would cost more to potential buyers when they were for sale. So it's changing different housing stock concerns and priorities. As recently as March 19th of this year, a directive from the state urged municipalities to remember the intent of accessory dwelling units vis-a-vis fair housing. The model zoning document includes this note: don't allow short-term rentals for protected use ADUs if they will not support local housing needs. And then just a few general proofreading notes. Please take care to use the legal terms shall or will instead of may in the compliance sections. This eliminates any possibility of selective discrimination by enforcement agents. The intent of the last sentence of 4-50.7 is, I think, unclear. Conforming to the pattern of the ordinance, you may want to insert the building department requirements under 4-50.5C, where you've listed the fire department requirements. And then one other thing is that I don't think there is a 4-50.6. So anyway, thank you for listening.
Yes.
Yeah, I was,
Name and.
oh, sorry. John Santiago, 13 Oliver Street. I was curious about the lack of mention specifically about ADUs in the ordinance, and wanted to speak advocating for allowing short-term rentals in ADUs, even if part of the overall, even if it's limited. And I just wanted to speak to, you know, my case and how it might apply. First of all, I went back and read the Easthampton ordinance about ADUs and noticed that it had several intents, one of which is to meet the housing needs of Easthampton residents. I'm an Easthampton resident. My family is growing. We just had another kid. So we have 2 kids. We feel like our house is too small. We want to have family around us for multiple generations, but we can't afford to move in the current environment because of the housing crisis that we're all so aware of. Increased prices, increased mortgage rates, our limited income. So what we were able to do was to leverage some of our home equity and an incredible amount of sweat equity, and build an ADU that allowed us to have more frequent visits from grandparents, some of whom live in another country. And it was really important to us to generate this multi-generational household in a situation in which we couldn't afford to move. Because most of the time we're using it for family, there, or let's call it half the time, there's significant periods of time where it's free. And so our way of helping to finance the money that we put into it is to do short-term rentals. So in that way, it's meeting, I think there are housing needs of people that already live here that are also important. The housing needs of everybody in the world, also important, but we live here and I have a housing need. And so I think that I am going with the intent of the original Easthampton ordinance, which does not specify any affordability covenants. You can look at affordable housing covenants in other towns, they specify metrics. So I think it's important to see that way of meeting needs. And, my intent, just for my case, is to, when we can afford to move, we will move. And then that will revert to long-term housing stock. But I think I really urge the council to not penalize ADUs, because if we're worried about housing availability, what's the difference between a building in my backyard and the unit upstairs, or the building in my backyard and the single family home that's being used as an STR? I would make the argument that ADU is the only form of housing that's not literally taking housing stock away, because we're actually adding stock. So it's a net zero. But the cost to build an ADU is exorbitant. The idea that ADUs will solve the affordable housing crisis is not connected to reality if you look at the cost of building with the new mass energy codes and just the general cost of materials. So I don't think it's fair to lay, what we really need is structural change on a large level to create more units. We need massive amounts of subsidized multifamily units. I don't think it's fair to lay that responsibility on somebody like me, who put a lot of energy into adding housing stock to the town that will one day revert to a long-term rental. And, it's critical to my family's well-being in this town. So.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Yes.
Laura Brooks, 7 Greenwood Court. I have a 2-family and I live on one side and I sometimes Airbnb out the other side. And much like John was saying, my family's own needs for the property preclude me from having someone there for a year leasing it from me. It doesn't work for what our needs are. I too could not afford a house, maybe the one that I bought. But I think it's important to note that the idea that the units that we're putting on Airbnb would even be affordable housing from a pricing point. If my unit was on the market, I don't even think it would be considered to be in an affordable housing price bracket. So I don't see how it is impacting that. I will say that my guests who come and stay at my house and my Airbnb have been far kinder, politer, and better behaved than the people that I have had as long-term tenants. So, in that regard, can you vouch for that too? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Keep your. Sorry. And then the other thing that I would say is the idea that anybody is going to invest the copious amounts of money it is to build an ADU for the only purpose of using it as a short-term rental in Easthampton is kind of silly. It is a very expensive thing to do, and we're not a vacation hotspot. We're not throwing our places up on VRBO because that's not where we live. We're not next to a ski mountain, an ocean, a grand hiking trail. It's a small town economy that we have here. And I don't think we're going to have massive amounts of ADUs built specifically for the purpose of turning them into short-term rentals, because my short-term rental doesn't have that much occupancy. It's not like we're all full all the time. Are we all full all the time? I don't think we are. And I can't imagine that there would be enough business to go around to make somebody want to build something specifically for only that purpose. That would surprise me.
Thank you. Anybody else? You spoke already.
Kathy Wazinski, Overlook Drive. I wanted to first point out that Purdue University in the study showed that the short-term rental programs increased overall rents in a community and also increased values of purchasing a home, which both of those reduce affordability for anybody either trying to rent or trying to buy. So if our goal is some affordable housing, whether it's rental or purchasing, any short-term rental will impact that and increase the affordability of our community. Secondly, I would like to see the license and registration, if it occurs, be only valid for a year, so that there's a constant review of what's happening to verify that people are in compliance. I do not think that 50 is a reasonable amount for the city. Again, that idea that it increases rental prices for the whole city. I think a better number would be 25 or less. And if people have been operating a short-term rental program prior to this illegally, I don't think that they should be grandfathered in. I don't believe grandfathering in is appropriate. People should apply, and if they get it, they get it. If they don't, then that's the cost of doing things inappropriately. Again, the idea of 50 units, I think, will do more damage than benefit to our overall community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Roxanne Mariani Prawl, 90 Maple Street.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Roxanne Mariani Prawl, 90 Maple Street.
Thank you.
First of all, I just want to kind of clarify something, that the current short-term rental operators are not doing this illegally. The city of Easthampton and the state of Massachusetts have been collecting our occupancy taxes for as many years, at least since 2019. So it's not illegal what I'm doing, and I just want to sort of put that out there. I think that there are a lot of things that are making the affordability of buying a home in Easthampton in general. First of all, Easthampton's a great place to live. Who wouldn't want to live here? But I think there was a big push during COVID when people moved out of cities and could move into a smaller community like ours, and they drove up the price. That drove up the pricing. Also, I don't know if anybody in here has bought a home in the last 2 years, like I have. The interest rates are ridiculous, and so that's also driven up the cost. So there are a lot of variables involved, and it should all sort of go on the shoulders of the short-term rental. It shouldn't be perceived in that sort of black and white. There are a lot of variables involved. And also, I live in one side of a duplex, and the other side is a short-term rental, and it allows me to live in the house. If I did not have a short-term rental next door, after all of the renovations that I've done, I would not be able to afford it with a long-term tenant. They could not. They wouldn't generate the same revenue, and I wouldn't have the same ability to manage and maintain the property in the way that I do to keep it up, because it's like that's the biggest investment. So, and the guests who visit Easthampton, there are so many good things about it. But one thing is, because of the ratings that we all work to maintain, both the guests and the hosts, they have an incentive to be a good partner in our community. They're incentivized to do a good thing, do a good deed, be quiet, and be respectful of the neighborhoods. Whereas a long-term tenant does not have that same incentive. Once they're in there, they're in. Those are just some like little details that I just wanted to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Any, yep.
Yeah, my name is Catherine Hancock. I live at 4 Taft Avenue, Easthampton. And I just want to express some concern about the applicability of the building code regs for the transient lodging facilities, as it might apply to non-owner occupied homes. I think people that have older homes are going to have a really difficult time with that issue. It's going to pretty much eliminate a lot of people who are trying to do short-term rentals in Easthampton with older homes if they're non-owner occupied. There's a lot of stuff in there that would make it very, very difficult.
I'm passing around a sign-in sheet. If everyone can just sign it, it just makes it easier for the notes to be able to put everyone that's here. I have a pen for you.
Other comments? Other,
I'd like to comment to, should we,
for public speak or?
oh, this is public speak.
Yep.
See, that confused me because I thought public speak was for things that were not on the agenda.
Well, yeah, but because everyone's gonna have input, I'm allowing them to
I
speak
see.
now because
Okay.
I think it would just, well, otherwise they wouldn't have the opportunity to speak because then it would just be the committee speaking. And so I wanted to provide them the opportunity to share what they thought before we got into everything. So it was really just to for the committee to stay focused, really. Any other comment? Oh, it keeps going around. Okay. So there's no more comment. So what I have done is I've invited the fire chief, fire department, right? So you'll be able to talk. I've also invited Sergeant Alexander from the Easthampton Police Department to be able to speak. Our building commissioner is also here to be able to provide some information, as well as obviously our planning department is here. But I wanted to make sure that the police and fire had the opportunity to share their concerns, thoughts, but also answer any questions. So you'll all have the opportunity to answer questions again. I do, before we do that, and the building commissioner will have the chance to speak, we have been talking about fire code much in regards to this, and we've also been talking about building code, and I think that there's been a lot of confusion around sprinklers, right? And the fire code, right? It says that under 5 individuals, non-related, living in the residence, right? It does not have to have a sprinkler system, but 6 or over, you do have to have a sprinkler system. But the building code, actually, and I think this is what's been brought up, right? This is a little bit more complicated, and I'll give the building inspector the opportunity to speak to that. But under building codes 780 CMR, right, there is a requirement for a sprinkler system in short-term rentals, right? Short-term resident rental lodging units, and that's regardless of number, right? However, there are opportunities where someone could bring in a third-party vendor to provide some guidance on what could be done as a substitute for that, but then that would have to be approved. So I do want to provide that clarification for people, because I do think that that has been an issue, and it was, I will take full responsibility. It was unclear to me. I thought that that was a part of the limitation of the number of individuals in there, but I also thought that there was the opportunity of alternatives. But we can discuss that more and answer questions about that. But for now, I'd like to turn it over to Chief Norris to talk about his proposed and what's expected under.
On fire codes?
Yep. Fire
Sure,
codes.
absolutely. Thank you for letting me come and speak for your committee tonight, number
Yep.
one. Under Mass General Law, Chapter 148 is the state fire codes. And in regards to the topic here tonight, talking about short-term rentals, particularly under Section 26H. It's a local adoption. And basically what that law says is if each community locally adopts that section of the fire code, then it can be enforced. And Chapter 148, Section 26H is in regards to and pertains to residential sprinklers in these short-term dwelling units. That section of the state fire code was adopted by the city of Easthampton in 2005. So that is in place. It's been in place since that time. So what does that mean? That essentially means, based on the state fire code, that in regards pertaining to residential sprinklers, if you have occupants that are not related by second degree kindred, 6 or more, correct? 6 or more that are not related in these short-term dwelling units, you are required, based on state law, to have that occupancy sprinkler. So that's kind of the fire code end of it in regards to sprinklers. And again, just for the record, that was adopted back in 2005 by the city.
Is that, may I ask a question? Is that each of the 6 has to be unrelated? Like, what if 3 are related and 3 are a family?
As long as you have, if there's 6 or more that are related, then it pertains to sprinklers.
Okay, so even if, okay, I'm sorry. So if
Yeah,
it's 6 or more, regardless of relation, it requires sprinklers. I understand that, right?
I thought it said unrelated.
Yeah, I thought it said unrelated.
It's 6 or more who are unrelated to the operator of the facility. I just wanted to clear
Okay,
that up.
thank you. Yes.
Because it sounds like,
I get it.
the way it was being explained was 6 people who are not related to each other. And then that's
Yeah.
unrelated to the operator. So you can have a family of 6 not related to the operator. That requires sprinklers.
Thank you.
So I guess just a clarification. So I was actually one of the people that approved that section. And at the time, when we did it, it was specifically, and I mean very specifically, related to lodging houses. So short-term rentals didn't exist in 2005. So did the state change their wording? Because that was specifically for boarding houses when we adopted that. Because we had all the boarding house owners in here up in arms because it was going to cost them $20,000 to sprinkler their boarding house on Pleasant Street, and they were like threatening to sue us. So
Right. It says lodging house, which is not.
Sorry.
it's the same boarding house, lodging house. It was individual rooms for rent. They had hot plates. I mean,
Sprinkler. Right, that's the memorandum. So that kind of clarifies it. It was you might know where it is.
yeah, because I think the issue
So-
was people were in rooms with hot plates because they didn't have kitchens. So it was like, it was a lodging house, it was a transient house. And so that I remember you had to go and respond multiple times to the one on Pleasant Street because people were having fires in their living room or whatever, their one room. And that was the issue. That's why we adopted it.
So the automatic sprinkler board made a ruling on this. So this is the memorandum on that in January of 24, that short-term rentals will be considered under lodging.
So they did make a
It
change.
does apply.
Yeah.
So it does apply to that.
Oh, in 24.
So that's a
So
recent
just last year.
change.
Well, that was the city.
No. That's their interpretation of it. So that law applies. That law applies.
Yeah.
Period. To it. To
I'm sorry,
short-term
whose
rentals.
interpretation? I didn't.
The automatic sprinkler board, appeals board.
I see.
Yeah. They said short-term rentals, that's the equivalent of lodging houses.
And this
So
is
as
a
far
state
as
board.
As far as the 148, 26H goes, right? So if you were short-term rental and you were more than 6, we gave you an order to sprinkle, you could appeal it to the appeal board, but the appeal board is looking at your place as a short-term rental, as a lodging house. That's how they come up with that. Makes sense?
But I just want to clear that board is a state board.
Yeah, that's a state board. Yeah, it's a
I
state
just
board.
want to make sure that we understand that. I saw your hand first, Nikki, so you can.
I have a question, and I'm sorry, it's probably gonna seem absurd, but I'm gonna ask it. You were saying 6 or more unrelated, and the reason I'm asking is I've changed my listing to be 5 and under, but someone booked 5 and under, and infants aren't counted on booking sites. So I'm trying to figure out how to solve this problem, and is an infant a person? Is an embryo a person? Right? Like what's, not really, but you know what I'm saying? Like,
And it's a person.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. But I'd like to read this. This might
Go ahead.
clear this up. So just to be clear, and this is a memorandum that's sent out by fire services to help people cope with this section of the law, and it's updated as, say, January 24. Here's what it says, and it's a question and answer kind of situation. Is a sprinkler system required if a home or building is rented on a hosting platform such as Airbnb or Vrbo? Yes. If that's the short answer. So, you know, I mean, I could go on, but that's the answer. And this is the law that originally, this is 14826H. This first applied to lodging houses. That was the language, but now it's been updated to, because Airbnb, short-term rentals, remember the definition for short-term rental is different from lodging house, hotel, motel, or bed and breakfast even. It said it has its own definition, which weirdly excludes every one of those. It'll say in the definition, a short-term rental is not a lodging house or a bed and breakfast or a hotel and motel, but all of those things can be used as a short-term rental. And the reason it has its own definition is specifically so towns could adopt short-term rentals, put it on their use table, and therefore it would be by zoning an allowed use, just like hotels, motels, lodging houses, and bed and breakfast, which we also already have in Easthampton. So this makes it clear that any short-term rental use of any of those things is subject to this. And it focuses on lodging houses because hotels and motels when they're constructed, and because they're considered already, they're not allowed in residential districts. They already have sprinkler systems and alarm systems designed into them. Whereas an existing home that starts being used as a short-term rental doesn't. So this is just making it clear that if it's used as a short-term rental, it needs to have sprinklers. So that's all.
So I just wanted to, couple of things. So I'm very clear that the maximum number of guests is 5, so that additional expense of sprinklers, if that's capped at 5, it's still, right?
Again, that's the fire
That's
code we're
only
talking
fire
about.
code, not the building
The
code.
building code, yeah.
Okay,
This is
right,
the
okay.
fire code.
All right, cool. That's all I'm just clarifying. 5 guests or under, the fire code says no sprinklers are required.
Yeah.
Okay. That's it. Okay, cool.
But we're gonna get to the building code.
Yeah, next, right. I just want to get my facts straight. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I was
Mhm.
gonna say that didn't have a number. That didn't say 6. That just said short-term sprinklers.
It's using the definition from the beginning of the memorandum. It's using the definition for lodging house. And it
Oh, I
says,
see.
yeah.
Okay.
So it's still
Thank you.
referring back to the numbers that are stated in the
Yeah.
148,
Correct.
section 26H.
Okay, got it.
Any other questions regarding the fire code? And just in terms of experience, right? So we're moving away from the fire code, but want to just now talk about, you know, you all are working with a number, or work with, communicate with, engage with a variety of other communities who have short-term rentals, who do have kind of a permitting process, a licensing process. Can you share with this committee kind of the amount of time that might take from the other work that you are doing within the city and residents, et cetera, et cetera? Can you just kind of give us an understanding of kind of what would it take to be able to do 50, or if there wasn't a cap and let's say we had 150, like what would that do to your particular workload in terms of everything you're doing otherwise?
Yeah, it would obviously increase it. If we were talking about the 50 for the cap, you're talking probably at least an hour of inspection time plus report time. And then it would be any follow-ups that would have to be with that also. The other thing to take into account too is to track the short-term rental and how many days they've been renting, you know, and the amount of people that are renting, to make sure that everybody stays in compliance too. And I believe there's probably some software out there the city would have to look into purchasing or whatever to manage that too. So that would be another type of expense that we'd be looking at also.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And just to be clear, when you say an hour per unit, not when we're talking about
Right.
50 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. So have you gentlemen talked to your colleagues in Northampton about their process for Airbnbs? Because, you know, so like as far as you're talking about time, I went on the Northampton website today and you can register online. It's all automated, a pretty simple process, just a relatively few questions. So I'm curious, have you talked to your colleagues in Northampton about their process and how long it takes them? I mean, I would think they would have more. They're bigger,
Yeah.
twice as big as us.
So I have not, but in looking at South Hadley's ordinance, they have self-reporting. So the owner of, or the person who would manage the short-term rental would self-report. So there'd be, you know, a particular type of checklist that the city would come up with to give to them. They would self-report. They'd sign an affidavit, you know, every year or whatever, saying they do it. But it would also constitute also an actual inspection too. But it's just another tool that could be used. They could probably, you know, maybe streamline the inspection process somewhat, like that.
And just for the record also, there is proposed legislation moving forward right now with a lot of support that, based on a fatality of a family that happened in New York, they were from Massachusetts on the Cape, that there's going to be proposed legislation moving forward that it's required annually to have these types of occupancies inspected. So regardless of whether you have a self-reporting system or not, at some point there will be a requirement for the South Hadleys and everyone that they go into these occupancies annually and do that physical inspection.
And that'll be a law that'll be under the 148, under the fire code laws. Yeah, the law.
Other questions regarding fire code or any other thing we talked about?
I'm just curious, is
Can you say your name again? Sorry, I keep forgetting that.
Kathy Wazinski, Overlook Drive, is that the only issue in the fire code that applies to these, or are there other issues or concerns from the fire department?
In terms of the fire department, under our organization having some authority, having jurisdiction, we made some recommendations via email. And some of those were, for example, like a fire extinguisher, having the transient population come in and out. You have cooking fires that are a common cause of fires in residential structures. We thought it would be more than appropriate to have extinguishers put in there. We talked about smoke, carbon monoxide detectors.
Yeah. The other thing too is I have a request into the marshal's office too, to be a little bit more for some interpretation in our code. So the fire code is kind of a maintenance code. And there's a section in there that 1 and 2 families is exempt from, you know, from inspection and such. So we're looking for some guidance on that if a short-term rental is kind of like, is looked at as like a lodging facility, then there are other things in the fire code that would automatically kick in under 527. So we're trying to get some clarifications on that too.
That's helpful. Thank you. Other questions?
Sergeant Alexander, would you like to give your perspective and kind of how the Easthampton Police Department has been impacted by kind of short-term rentals within the community, so that we have a kind of a community has a better understanding of some of what that you have dealt with in regards to this? And then if folks have questions, then we'll open it up to questions as well.
Sure. Yeah, mine's fairly easy, and thank you for inviting us. We appreciate being involved in the process of moving our city forward. Really, the only ordinance or part of the ordinance is 4-50.5A6 about noise. And I'd highly recommend keeping that and keeping the ability to issue fines for any violations. Really, aside from that, that's our biggest thing that we've seen with the short-term rentals in town. It's kind of a tough thing because, you know, if it's a regular or single-family dwelling and we go to a house that's not a short-term rental and we talk to somebody, say on a Thursday night, hey, your neighbor's called, can you keep it down? Sure. Friday, if we go back, we're very reasonable when it comes to noise. We just want to mediate every situation. Go back the next night. Come on, we were here 2 nights in a row. By the third night, all right, now you're going to be, you know, criminally charged by either arrest or summons to court. When it's a short-term rental, if you have somebody on Thursday, a different person Friday, a different person Saturday, I'd hate to be that person Saturday that's catching a criminal charge because of the noise they're making, just trying to have fun because the last 2 people. So having the ability to, you know, issue fines when it's an excessive, just specifically on the noise, I think that's a really good thing. One other thing, the registration part of it would be really good, especially for the police department to have. So if we are called to your house, and I know a lot of these are owner occupied, say you're out for the night or you're out of town and you're renting your place. If we're able to notify you, and we're in the process of getting new computer software, but I'm sure it's much better than our current, and I'm sure they'll be able to do it. But with our current, we can make notes in our property cards. So for any address, if they register, so we can have the owner's info. So say you're not around and we have your name and phone number, we can call you and say, hey, look, you have a noise complaint here. We're going to just, you know, warning, but make sure you talk to your tenants and keep it down. It's a way for us to keep in contact. And I think it'd be really good for everybody just to work together. But as far as we've had the sporadic people that come to town, a lot, 90%, I don't know the exact stat, but I'd say most are trying to do the right thing, just supplement income. And it's either families or you know, people that are there visiting for the right reason. We've had plenty of spots in town. They were advertised as basically party houses where you go, they had a pool table, a hot tub, a great music system, and I say kid, but the 18 to 25-year-olds from surrounding towns or even down in Connecticut would be coming up here, enjoy our nightlife. They're in the hot tub at 2 a.m. and the neighbors are calling night after night after night. And unfortunately, it's tough to take enforcement action. There were no repercussions. So I think that's good, and I think it's something that should stay. But I'm more here for questions if anybody has any of the police department.
Just out of curiosity, I know that
Sorry, can you say your name again?
Mindy Kofferman. It was brought to the host's attention that there was one house that you guys have been to like 40 times. But other than that house, can you estimate how many short-term rental calls you've made to in the last year?
So a lot of times we don't know that they're short-term rentals, but ones that we found out after the fact it's very sporadic. It's, you know, maybe 1 or 2 here and there. None that have, this one we looked into more because it was a pattern every weekend. And this is one of the ones I was talking about where it turned into, there was probably only maybe off the top of my head, I can think of 2 others that were repeated responses. And it's because people knew that this was a place to go party, not a place to lay your head because you're in town visiting family or attending Wilson's graduation. So other than that, just sporadically, you'd have people go and they get in fights with their significant others, or they go and they use drugs and somebody would call, we've had overdoses at short-term rentals, but that's, you can't really, in my opinion, take those into account as, you know, we look for the patterns, not the sporadic things.
Other questions?
I would just, so one of the things that we talked about last time, and I didn't, because I was reviewing the fire department's recommendations, and I didn't see a key box in here, and I thought maybe we had talked about that, and that might be helpful for our first responders, make them give another layer of, you know, accountability and safety.
Yeah, we talked about key box, but we hadn't, as a committee, decided that. I think it was just information. And so, but that's certainly something that we as a committee could talk about, but also it was something that there were some folks who identify as hosts said that they didn't feel comfortable doing that. And so, you know, as a recommendation, but not a requirement. So I don't think we landed on as a requirement.
I just wanted to revisit that, and as we have our first responders here, it might make sense to hear their thoughts on having a key box available for use at a residence.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I don't know if it would be more prudent to amend the emergency key box ordinance to reflect short-term rentals instead. Just a thought.
Yeah.
Other questions? Other question? Can you?
Mindy Cullerman. Dan, along that lines, would giving a code, like if we're using a keypad, just giving you guys a code would be sufficient to get in?
A keypad to get into the house.
Well, like somebody can punch in a number, but we don't give people keys anymore to go in the houses so that they can be changed all the time for safety.
It's true. We most of the time use our.
So is it okay just to give you guys a code?
So, I mean, typically, you know, when people have that, we do take the code and we'll put it in the dispatch software. So it's readily accessible for us. But my only concern is that everybody might not have that.
Right. But I mean, could it be an
So-
either or it has to be one?
You can- I don't know. I think it would have to be the key box. We talk, yeah, but it's definitely more discussion we can have on that, so.
But again, just for clarification, a key box, you would have just a standard key that would fit any key box that's.
Yes, we have 2 keys that fit all the key boxes in the community, and stuff that we can access, so yes.
And a key box could hold a code too, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of them, yeah, they put in the code also. Yeah, and you could go with the residential boxes, which are a little bit less expensive, because you won't have to have multiple keys. I would think if it's just one key, we could probably look at the smaller boxes, so.
I saw a hand over here.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with
Say your
these.
name.
Oh, sorry, John Santiago, 13 Oliver. I wasn't familiar with that. So this is a product that just the fire department would have a key to access the box?
Yes.
It's not like one we buy and tell you the code.
No.
Okay, that's much
Yeah,
better.
it's just one company that has it. You have to order it through them.
Okay,
We have a standard key. Yeah,
and that saves you from breaking down a door.
exactly. The first time we have to break down an order, it'll pay for itself.
Yeah.
Every business in Easthampton.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
You'll see
that's
them.
why, yeah.
You'll see those little black boxes. That's our.
Sounds
boxes.
very
Yeah.
reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other question, I see another hand. Yeah,
Maybe we could get a hyperlink to where to buy that box so we can put it on our.
Oh, sure.
That would be great. I don't know where we would find.
Yeah.
maybe you could email it to me and I could share it with someone.
Oh, so
in
the
group.
businesses buy that box? You don't provide?
No, we don't
No.
provide it. No, the businesses
Oh, okay.
purchase them. Everybody
Great.
purchases them.
Are they
Yeah.
expensive?
The commercial ones are about $400. They're like this thick steel. Yeah. Yeah, they're pretty beefy. They're really, yeah.
I just Googled it and they have red ones that are like $87, but I don't know if that's the
No,
right one.
it has to be this one. I'm sorry. I
Okay,
know.
that's okay, that's
It's
okay.
gotta be specific, so we
That's
have one
okay.
key.
Yeah, it's got
That's why I
a,
want to make sure I get the
I
right
know the
one.
price keeps going up over years. I'm like,
It's
I have the
okay.
2025 order forms, so, but I think the residential boxes might be in the 300s. So for that one. Yeah, and you can even hook it up to an alarm system too. It's made for that if you wanted to, so anyway.
Other questions for folks? Okay, I want to come back to, just so we're clear, I want to come back to the building code. Just so we are clear about what is in the building code. So according to the building code, and actually I'm just gonna turn it over to the building inspector to explain what is in the building code regarding short-term rentals.
So I noticed in any draft ordinance, there's reference to building codes, compliance with all building codes. And then the mayor's recommendations, there's also some language around, and I believe also in the draft ordinance about compliance with other zoning things and such, and building maintenance and so on and so forth. So right now, well, I'll start with that piece of it. So table 110 is called schedule for periodic inspections of existing buildings. And short-term rentals are then have become part of that schedule for periodic inspections. So essentially, owner-occupied short-term rentals are required to be inspected at least once every 2 years. Non-owner occupied once every 1 year. So you have to take that into account if you're considering. And the reason for that is, you know, I guess the thinking behind it is that if it's owner occupied, you're there, you're maintaining things. If you're not, and it's just like a G-box or something, whatever, and you're not there much in touch, things can get maybe a little out of maintenance, a little, all of the then required fire safety systems may have to be inspected at that time too. Reports on actually an inspection from somebody that's may test the fire safety systems. They would generate a report. Those are usually available at the time of the inspection, whether it's biannual or annual. So just that is, I know the ordinance referred to something about any required inspection. So I'm just telling you what the requirement is according to the building code. On to the sprinklers. So unlike the fire code, which you would have to have 6 or more occupants before the fire department could issue an order to install sprinklers, the building code has no such limitations. Any portion of a building or a building used as a short-term rental requires the installation of sprinklers. That's the prescriptive building code requirement. It is sprinklers.
Can you read
And
that specifically out of the code so that we can hear it? Can you read that specific?
the section of the
That's-
code,
Yes.
R31, so building code, like a lot of codes, is very,
I just want to hear the language that says specifically that if you have a short-term rental, you have to have sprinklers. Can you read that part? So, and then
primarily occupied 1 or 2 family dwellings and accessory spaces newly constructed as short-term rental lodging houses and primarily occupied 1 and 2 family dwellings and accessory spaces which began being used as short-term rental lodging houses on or after October 17, 2017 shall be equipped with an automatic sprinkler system installed in accordance with NFPA 13D. So we're talking about existing buildings versus talking about new buildings. They require it. Existing buildings that started being used as short-term rentals after October 17, 2017 require sprinklers. So it's retroactive. So, and maybe a point to just make about that is that this is a requirement that cannot be waived by local ordinance. Building code is building code. The ordinance can't waive this. It can't nullify it in any way, shape, or form. It's required by the building code.
That's a state building.
State building code, yes.
Can you say the number of the code
Sure.
again?
R313.2, 1 and 2 family dwellings, automatic sprinkler systems. Now, they said building code is like so many other codes. It will send you to different places. So there's a note at the end of what I just read. It says, non-primarily owner-occupied 1 and 2 family dwellings shall meet the requirements of 780 CMR based on the use classification determined in accordance with 780 CMR Chapter 3. The relevance of that is that now it sends you out of the residential code to the base code. The base code is commonly referred to as commercial code. You're no longer in 1 or 2 family dwelling. The relevance of that is because the building components, actually building a 1 or 2 family dwelling, typically type 5 construction, is lighter construction than all the other forms of construction. So now 2 code books, and actually there are 3 because we started on an existing building code to get to a lot of places. But this is straight up from building code R313.2. Note sends you to Chapter 3 of the base code or the commercial code. That goes into, oh, go ahead.
So just to circle back around, because I'm not sure if this was relevant. Are you saying that if it's a single family or 2 family house and it's become an Airbnb after 2017, regardless of whether or not it is owner occupied, it has to have sprinklers?
Yes.
So it can be owner occupied and it still has to have sprinklers?
Yes, but there is a difference that makes it owner occupied units maybe more, may appeal to more people than, you know, in the long run, because there's additional cost for non-owner occupied. And the reason for that is, well, non-owner occupied is inspected once a year. There's a fee associated with the inspection every year. You also would be held to installing sprinklers in those units. Whereas, for instance, I'm going to go to the back just to maybe cut through some of the suspense. I'm not sure if this is helpful, but and this is only for buildings that were pre-existing, not built as short-term rentals, which would be rare, right? But if you're building an ADU, and that's where the ADU discussion is relevant, if somebody is building an ADU specifically to be used as a short-term rental, it has to have a sprinkler system installed. There's no way around it. Whereas if you have an existing building that has begun being used as a short-term rental, there is a compliance alternative that can be proposed to sprinklers. The compliance alternative that some that have been used are monitored alarm systems, much cheaper to install than a sprinkler system. But that's something that the property owner, and maybe through consultation with a third party, a design professional, somebody who looks at the situation on the ground, would then propose a compliance alternative. And then that would be submitted to the building department and would be reviewed. Now, the criteria for a compliance alternative, I'll just read the definition. Compliance alternative, an alternative life safety construction feature which meets or exceeds the requirements or intent of a specific provision of 780 CMR. The building official is authorized to approve or disapprove compliance alternatives. Compliance alternatives are allowed only for existing buildings. New building, you know, not an option. So, and a compliance alternative can be anything. And if a design professional comes up with a compliance alternative and can show that it meets or exceeds the intent and the level of safety of sprinklers specifically, and it's a good plan, and the building official can look at it and approve that compliance alternative. So, and by almost default, it would be a case by case situation. You may have some very complicated pathways to rooms in a house, for instance, that require all kinds of things. It might not be practical for somebody to try to come up with something that's as effective as sprinklers under those situations. Whereas if you have a room with a door going directly outside, 12 feet across the room, you're out of the place. Well, a compliance alternative is more feasible, more of an option. So,
Katrina Pearson, you have a question online?
Yes, hi, I have a question specifically about that, because I'm reading this.
Katrina, can you say your name and your address? Yep.
Absolutely. I'm Katrina Pearson. I'm representing my mom. We're on 14 Taft Avenue. I'm an Easthampton resident. I'm just curious because I'm looking at this memorandum from the Sprinkler Appeals Board, the State Sprinkler Appeals Board, and it specifically says, the question is, does the Massachusetts State Building Code or the International Building Code mandate whether sprinklers will be required? It specifically says, no, the installation of sprinklers is mandated only by MGL 148, section 26H. So, which is the language that requires for 6 or more unrelated. So I'm just curious how those work together, because it seems to me that the building code doesn't have.
Where is that in the memorandum? You're talking about the same memorandum issued in
It's number 4.
Number 4.
And it does say, does the Massachusetts State Building Code or the International Building Code mandate that the sprinklers will be required? The answer is no.
And well, then there's a conflict there because the building code requires it.
Well, it says the portion of the statute states that in accordance with provision of the state building code, that applies to the design and method of installation of the sprinkler system as prescribed by the state building code. And then it states case law that basically says why it's not applicable.
So we're talking about installation of sprinklers mandated by 148.26H. That's different. We're talking about fire code and building code. So under the fire code, well, that would be true. I mean, look at the question.
Hang on just one second, Katrina.
Sorry.
So Sprinkler Appeals Board deals with fire code orders. That's the Sprinkler Appeals Board. Building code doesn't go to the Sprinkler Appeals Board. It goes to the BVRS. Totally different everything. So number 4 doesn't affect the building code. And I would say vice versa. Building code does not affect this.
Do you want to finish your comment?
No, I think that's something that I'll bring up to the lawyer because I think it's pretty clear here, but that's for another date.
Okay. And you had your hand up?
Yeah. Do you have an experience with the compliance alternative, and can you describe what that is?
Well, sure. South Hadley, there are 2 places in South Hadley where I worked prior to coming here. Same thing happened. Essentially, it was almost the same scenario. There was a complaint. There was follow-up by me. I sent letters. There was no short-term rental allowed by zoning. The town took it up as an issue. I co-wrote the in the beginning.
I'm wondering do you have a compliance alternative?
I'm getting to that. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was all the same thing. 2 people there availed themselves of the opportunity to for a compliance alternative to sprinklers. I worked with the fire department there. We agreed on the compliance alternative, and that was implemented.
Can you describe what the
there were alarm systems, monitored alarm systems with horn strobes in the rooms, emergency lighting, and exit signs. Now, the one unit didn't require exit signs because it's just really so obvious. It was just a room. door going out. The other one had hallways, had a room. It was pretty far away from a lot of things. You could get confused about how to get out of the building. So there were emergency lights in both places, but in one had directional exit signs out. And the horn strobes, for those who don't know what that is, it's one of those things that's usually red. I don't see one here. It goes, it makes a noise,
You might want to check that.
a horn, or strobes,
As
with
a
blinking
building,
lights. Yeah,
Maybe you should check it out.
yeah.
Make sure it's here.
So, and for residential use, there are ones that are nicer looking than the ones you see in commercial. You know, they're white, they look pretty cool, but it can tend to get people out quick because there's no sprinklers, right? So it's an alternative. The requirement for sprinklers does not require any alarms, or any emergency lights or any of that stuff. But ultimately, it's far cheaper, right, to put in emergency lights, horn strobes. Anybody will have to update all of any use of these in existing buildings have to update the fire alarm, smoke alarm, CO alarm, and heat alarms in the house to current code standards.
That part doesn't, I have a question. Why is it we don't care about long-term tenants in this way?
Well, in code, everything comes down to the state of, to the stay. How long is the stay? So there's expressed as transient and non-transient. And a building classifications this heavily comes into, so you have, I guess one of the things is that transient, less familiarity with the lay of the property and the house where they are. There's just less familiarity, whereas apartments, apartment is another classification. So with R1, those are transient occupancies, hotels, motels. R2, apartments. So you say, well, somebody early on in an apartment, the first month, well, they're pretty much in the same boat as a transient occupant, under 30 days. But once they've been there for a while, they're familiar with the building. So it's, in the long run, it's far safer because now they know how to get out in the middle of the night, perhaps. Now they know that this window works and they can climb out it. Things like that. So transient, and that's how it's really mostly expressed through building code. Short-term, long-term is just essentially the equivalent of transient, non-transient. And building classification is based entirely on those two concepts or those two states.
What are single-family homes what are they classified as?
R3 under the base code.
Duplex and R3 as well.
I'm sorry, what?
A duplex, is that also R3?
Yes, 1 or 2 family dwellings are R3s.
Okay, gotcha.
As are apartments above the mixed-use building. You can have the mixed-use building, but the units themselves are R3.
Other questions?
All that,
Say your name again.
John Lucido, 63 Strong Street. All that being said, so when I made my ADU specifically to short-term rent, I had a fire inspection and a building inspection and a health inspection. And it appears as though at that time, I should have been told that I needed fire sprinklers or an alternative to those fire sprinklers. And then I could have made a real determination about whether I wanted to short-term rent the space based on those extra expenses. So now that we know what the rule, what the codes are, how long are we going to get? We're going to have to determine how long we can have to comply with these new findings.
Yep, that's not a decision that we're gonna make
Oh, I know.
tonight, but yep.
I know,
hear
I'm
you.
just saying, like, I'm putting that out there on the record that we're gonna have to figure out a plan because we've all been inspected already.
Question.
David, quick question for you. Do these requirements apply to bed and breakfasts?
Sorry?
The requirements that you're talking about for transient housing and sprinklers under the building code, do they apply to bed and breakfasts?
Yes, they do.
So any bed and breakfast in town would need to know this as well.
Yes.
Yep, John.
I'm just curious if
just looking back at the memorandum and the language in the building code, is there any question about like the way that, because it says short-term rental lodging house, and there is case law that refers to lodging houses as places where you have separate rooms with separate people. And is there any, I'm just wondering if there's any doubt that maybe the intention of this is aimed at something different than what we're talking about. And the reason I ask is because Massachusetts has a pretty, Easthampton aside, Massachusetts has like a very large short-term rental industry. And this presumably should now affect the whole state. Is it new? Have you heard from other towns how they're dealing with it? And, you know, because it kind of seems like it would rock like the Cape, for example, you know?
I met 3 weeks ago now with a room full of building officials who were all there for the purpose of discussing exactly how to go about doing this, because it is a something that hasn't been enforced in some places. So just to be fair, you know, building officials, they're from one end of the scale to the other as far as like how actively they actually enforce the code. Some towns might go out of their way to hire somebody who doesn't enforce codes. I've heard of people getting fired, building officials actually getting fired because they do their job, you know, and that's not what the council wanted or the administrator. It's just a fact, you know, that there's a lot of politicizing around it, a lot of manipulating of, you know, we want our town to be this way and we don't want a building official, any official really, who maybe enforces all the rules, even though, and I find it curious because we're just enforcing building code and a lot of times zoning ordinance. Who created the zoning ordinance? The town. So you're hired to enforce the zoning ordinance, which are local laws, that the town willingly adopted. They had discussions over it and all voted on it. And then they hire a building official who does exactly what the law says, and they're chastised for it, you know, because, well, that's not what, it's creating a problem. But some towns, as I say, it's one end or the other. Other towns want pretty strict enforcement, which is also hard to do because, you know, I think, now I live in Easthampton. I've been here for a long time. Never worked here. I was on the zoning board of appeals, so I kind of know, I think I know the town well enough to know that, yeah, I'm going to do my job, you know, because it's my duty. That's what I was hired to do. And I have to follow things where they go. But other building officials, all towns are different. But I was in a room with 25, 30 other building officials, all very interested in now that this is very clear in the 10th edition that this is required. There's no ambiguity here. How do we do this? What should we do? We met with 2 state inspectors, one of whom actually wrote the code on this and has been at it for the last 10 years trying to get this enacted. And finally, after all the public comment, it is now building code and it has to be enforced.
10th edition starts this summer though, right? It's not.
Sorry?
The 10th edition starts this summer, isn't that right?
Well, so right now we're in a concurrency period. That's a good question. So 9th edition, 10th edition. So we're still in the 9th edition, and the concurrency ends on June 30th. So, but there is a path, right? It doesn't really matter because in the 10th edition, as I said, this is retroactive. So there's no, once the 10th edition, which is very straightforward, requires fewer steps to get to where you need to go to say places that need to be sprinklered, because that's been there all the time. it's retroactive to October 17, 2017. Doesn't, so we'll wait till July 1st. See where things stand then. You know, I think it's important to know that while we're working on the zoning part of it, or the general ordinance, I think is what's happening right now, not zoning, is that the building code could be enforced anytime. But this is not part of the moratorium on enforcement. But and during knowing that there are places out there that should be sprinklered and they're not, is kind of the town, again, being very generous, taking on this kind of like, well, you know, tonight, if a fire breaks out at a place and people are injured, that's when the finger pointing starts. Why were these places not sprinklered? It's been here all this time. Why is there nothing being done? So the town is going out kind of on a limb. Frankly, I feel that I'm part of the town. I'm going out on a limb as well. I'm not sending out any enforcement of the building code right now, just seeing where things go and how this pans out. But it is something that is required. It will be required. It is required now, and it will become very required, you know, the longer we go. It's ultimately, it is what's going to have to happen. So
Great, thank you, David.
yeah.
Thank you. Do either counselors have another question? You good? All right, great. So I want to I think that was a lot of information that we got, and a lot that the three of us now need to think about as we come into the next meeting. I want to be respectful of folks' time. I think, right, I just think that there's a lot that we need to kind of think about and have questions for the next meeting, so that we can actually get this into a good place. With that being said, I'd like to schedule another meeting that we can Does 2 weeks work for folks?
28th.
We have a meeting on the 28th.
We have a meeting on the 28th already. Yep. What about the 24th?
I'm gone.
I'm gone.
I have jury duty. What about the 30th? Because I don't think that's a city council
No,
or
it's a board.
I don't think we'll have finance either. 5:30, 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock?
6 works. Yes.
Any other comments from council? Did you send everyone resend the minutes?
Yeah, send that now.
Okay. Let's do it the next meeting. Great, so I will take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Thank you, everyone.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.